So in your company, basically you accompany your customers through the design and development and industrialization of the products, right? So does it happen that people come to you and say, hey, here's the design, I've already done a lot of the work, I just need you to sort of help me with the last touches, right? Does it happen?
Absolutely. I think one of the most common things that we hear from new startups and people who are new to the process of manufacturing is, hey guys, we're 80% of the way there, we just need someone's help to find a factory and oversee production. And of course, our reaction to that is great, let's see what you have. So we want to see your prototype, your PRD, your tech files. And 99% of the time, they can give us a prototype and then something like, this is pretty much what we want, but we need it to be more like this, and we don't have the files because someone else designed it, but this works. That's the most typical mistake that we see from people who are eager to get to production. The process is set out for a reason, and the process works. And I've seen, and I've tried in my in years with different products, I've tried to help people to get to the end result faster. But ultimately, the process needs to be followed, without sounding like it's a very strict, cumbersome process. It's something that does need to be followed. I have one example where a company came to us with a prototype that worked reasonably well, and they wanted to launch it for that Christmas. And we told them that like this is not fully designed. There's a PD phase that needs to be complete, and then there's an MPA phase, and then we can go to production. And they insisted, and they went direct to the factory, and the factory said okay. So they missed the first Christmas launch. Then they went into the next year, and they built their prototypes, and they were almost ready to go. But because they hadn't done their material planning properly and their material selection properly, their key component, which was a camera module, went end of life. So then they needed a new camera module, which means a new redesign and a new PD, a new NPI, and they ended up missing their second Christmas with the same product. So that company obviously doesn't exist anymore. Had they said at the very start, we're not experts, we want to follow someone's process, they would have missed that Christmas, but it would have launched 3-4 months later. But as a result of following a process that they thought would get them to production faster, 18 months later they just went out of business.
Yeah, we've been involved in a number of sort of troubleshooting missions with these kinds of companies. For example, one of them, yes, they also wanted to launch their product before Christmas because, yes, it does make sense from a business point of view. And they had already selected their contract manufacturer that had supposedly been instrumental in bringing another very famous and very successful product to market. Whether that was true, we have no idea, but it really made them feel safer.
Sure.
And they had already paid for some long lead time components to that manufacturer, so they were already hooked. They didn't have some of the engineering files, so they were also hooked because they couldn't easily go to another manufacturer. A lot of the components had already arrived, and they found that, with this one and this one we have like 30%, 40% defect rates. So the qualification of the suppliers had been terrible, actually non-existent.
Yeah.
And there was a project manager at that contract manufacturer who was sort of running around with no method in mind, just what is the crisis of today,
Just
what is
firefighting.
tomorrow. Yes, right. And they didn't have the testing stations yet. They didn't have some of the fixtures yet. I mean, it was terrible. They didn't have one of the key components yet. Terrible. So, that's production hell, right? That's really hell, because the buyers who had paid and financed all of that had no idea what was going on, and they didn't see the end of the tunnel. So what we had to do is say, okay, we're gonna do twice a week, 7 a.m. on the line, review the problems from the last few days, and set the plan for the next few days, and keep the overall plan in mind, and see what needs to be done, to get everything to come together. But at one point, I mean, we nearly got thrown out of the project because we told them, you know what, they told you everything was ready, you see it's not ready. Well, we can tell you it's not even ready for next month. It's not gonna, you're not gonna ship maybe maximum 100 pieces next month. Forget about it. it's going to be best case in 2 months.
Yeah,
And they just didn't want to hear it.
that's a common error as well in hardware. I think in our industry and consumer, a lot of people's background is in software, and like a lot of VCs and investors are in software, and software you can pivot. You can make a mistake and just pivot, and the next day you can do something different. Not exactly the next day, but pretty much. And they try and apply the same philosophy to hardware. So when you encounter issues at a factory like that, they just expect you to be able to fix it and turn it around. But you can't change a tool or a PCBA or an assembly or a FCC certification overnight. So no one wants to hear the truth when you're firefighting like that, that it's day by day by day, but the result that you want to get to is months away. Like there's no quick fix once a product is in trouble like that.
Absolutely. Oh, and their software was not right yet, so they were still pushing updates to the software, and they were not happy about it yet. However, it was already supposed to be in production. Right? You heard that many times, I'm sure, right? So that's a typical example. But the if you don't follow the proper methodology for the NPI process, if you don't know what's in the BOM, well, if there's a problem with a component, you rely on the manufacturer, don't you?
Yes.
So you can't even go and see that component manufacturer and understand what's going on and maybe switch to another one. Maybe it's the brother of the boss of your assembly factory, and they don't want it to change, even though it's horrible, right? Have you had these kind of issues?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a common conversation we have. People ask me regularly, if I go straight to a factory, can I be successful? And my answer is always the same. It's like, yes, of course you can, depending on the factory you select. But if you're going to go factory direct, you need to make sure that you have access to all your files, your original design files, your CAD files, your schematics, your Gerbers, your BOMs. If you don't have your own original design files, you don't have your product. So I've seen in a lot of cases where people go factory direct and they can launch a product no problem, but when they want to move or they want to cost down, they don't have any files. They don't have anything, so they have no choice, and they end up paying someone to re-engineer their product so they can own their own product.
Right. They're more like distributing the manufacturer's product. It's kind of like private labeling.
Exactly.
Even though they finance all of that, and the manufacturer run the lot with their ideas. Yeah. Well, in the end, what can they do if the manufacturer sells the same product to an Australian customer?
Yeah,
right?
and it can be very attractive if you're a small company and you're trying to do things on a shoestring budget. If you're not paying engineering costs for MPI, or maybe you're not even paying your tooling costs, which I've seen many times. But if you're not paying your tooling costs, you don't own your tool, and you don't own your tool design. So when you realize that you're being charged $2 extra for every unit, you can't move because you don't own your tool, and you can't get a quotation because you don't have the files.
Right.
So it's a common issue that people don't understand when they go factory direct. Of course you can successfully go factory direct, but you need to know what you're asking for, what you need, and what they need to provide.
Yeah, and maybe your price goes up 20% every 6 months.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they know they have you, right? Just when the volumes really go up, then they say, let's move this one. That's happened so many times. Well, that's a great overview. So typical mistakes we mentioned is not having transparency on the bill of material, not paying the engineering, but counting on the supplier to subsidize it, so that actually in the end you don't have the files. Because why would you have them? Because you didn't actually pay for that, so you don't own it. And not planning properly for the proper validation phases, so you get to mass production, but all of these issues that you have not ironed out are actually catching up with you, and you have to fight with all of them at the same time, and you've already disbursed, you already have so much money on the table, on the shop floor, in the warehouse, but some of it has to be basically thrown away, right? So you're losing a lot of money, but this also impacts your timing greatly, because it always comes together. If you have a smooth process, overall you're going to have fewer issues that you're going to actually save money and save a lot of time.
Exactly. I mean, and that's ultimately what this whole thing comes down to. Having process comes down to having control, planning, and knowing when your revenue is going to start coming in and what you're spending. Like, that's ultimately what these businesses need to know, right? You're going to spend money on your tooling, your DFM, your NPI, your pre-production, your qualification, your certification. You budget all that out, and then you know you're going to ship in 6 months, 12 months time. If you think you're going to ship in 3 months and all of these costs are hidden, you've no budget, you've no plan, you've no control.
Absolutely. You're totally relying on the manufacturer, but the incentives of the manufacturer most of the time is to get your advance payment, so they hook you to make production and ship it out to you, because most of the time, even if it's bad, you're not going to return it to you.
Yeah, you need it.
And they tend to be very optimistic. So these are the very high risks to keep in mind when designing and developing a new product for manufacturing in China.
Yeah, unfortunately, manufacturing and supply chain is not as glamorous as product design and development, so people don't think about it as much, but ultimately, if it's not done correctly, you don't have a product.
That's right.